Hello, everybody. My name's Alexis Janson. You may know me from the Great Designer Search 1. I won that whole shebang, and that was exciting. There was a second one, but then there was a third one. And so today, I'm here to talk to the awesome winner of the third Great Designer Search, Ari. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Ari Nieh. As Alexis said, I won the third Great Designer Search. And you might know me on the internet from Goblin Artisans, which is a blog that a bunch of us started after the second Great Designer Search because we were so excited about writing about magic design, we just couldn't stop ourselves. I'm here tonight to talk a little bit about my experiences and what it was like doing that competition.
Yeah, awesome. Welcome. I'm super excited. I was super excited watching you guys. Obviously it has a little bit of a personal place in my heart watching more people go through the crazy gauntlet that I went through. But you did a lot of awesome work, but there was some really good competition. It was a tough competition.
Absolutely. Yeah, I felt like there were many of the other competitors who, if things had gone slightly differently, like so many different people could have won. There was so much talent in that top 8.
Yeah. And I'm hoping that Wizards, like in the first and the second, recognizes that, and a couple more people get jobs out of this whole deal. I'm sure we won't know until the ink is dry if anything like that does happen.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I am very much rooting for some people to get jobs at Wizards either in the near future or maybe a little bit later.
Yep, both of those have happened. There was definitely at least one person from each GDS that didn't get another job for like 3 months or 6 months, but eventually did. So it could happen. Yeah, yep. That's awesome. So I wanted to start by asking you what motivated you to choose this for your avatar?
Oh, yes. So this beautiful art is from the holiday card Naughty/Nice. It's a split card, right? And then, on the naughty half, it looks like sort of this his mouth is covered with blood because he's just committed some act of vampirism or something like that. And then on the nice side, you see it's a pie. And I chose it because I thought it was just adorable and funny, that it represented my personality very well, which is that I don't take things too seriously, and I'm usually eating, and his hair kind of looked like mine, so I was like, absolutely this card.
There's a little bit of a striking resemblance there, actually.
Yeah, actually I have a funny story about that. So when I told my mom I was in the Great Designer Search, she thought I meant design, like graphic design.
Okay.
Like I was going to be doing art for Magic cards, which is hilarious because I can't draw at all. And you'd think my mom would know this. But she thought that I had drawn this as a self-portrait of myself. that this was like something I had submitted to Wizards of the Coast to be like, look how good my art skills are, and I made top 8 in art competition as a result.
Right.
So thanks,
That's
Mom.
Awesome. Yeah.
I'm glad you believe in my art skills such as they are.
Well, welcome to the club. You will not be the first person probably in the world who tells somebody that you design Magic cards and they say, "Oh, so you draw the art then?"
Yeah, I've been getting that a lot when I tell people.
Cool. So let's see. So let's start at the beginning, I guess. We'll kind of walk through everything you went through. So right at the beginning, the first trial as Wizards, or as Mark Rosewater called it, was the essays. I read through your essays. They didn't actually post them on the mothership. You guys had to post them on Goblin Artisans, which was, I'm just saying that for anybody who's reading who didn't get to see your essays. If you want to find them, you have to go to Goblin Artisans. I didn't actually read through them until like a few days ago, and these are hilarious, or at least this one was hilarious. Was this like you're kind of like you're like, I'm auditioning not just to be a great designer, but as a backup plan, I want you to see that I can write articles for Wizards.com?
I didn't have that in mind specifically, but what I did have in mind was that, they're going to be looking through a lot of people's card designs. Everyone is going to do well on the multiple choice. That's a given if they're even looking at your other stuff. And they're going to be looking at a lot of people's card designs. So I was thinking, I'm sure my card designs will be good, but lots of people have good designs. but I feel like my essays might be a place where I can jump out and make them laugh and make them think and make them be like, okay, this is a person who we just have to learn more about. So
Sure.
I put a lot of effort into my essays, possibly more than trial 2 or trial 3.
That's totally understandable. I mean, when you're competing against several thousand other people, you're not going to win or even get noticed just by being good. You got to be different somehow.
Yeah.
I remember taking that approach on my design test, I think it was, and I don't remember if
It went very well for you, if I recall.
in fact, actually, I think you were the one who wrote that you tried to follow in my footsteps on that.
I did. It didn't, and that didn't work out so great for me. But that's that was
we could talk
my
about
own
that
misinterpretation
when we get to that.
Yeah.
How much do you think that your writing? I mean, you obviously have writing skills. You obviously have a lot of practice from various things you've done, both on writing and just card design. Like, how much do you think your life kind of prepared you for this? Like, were you ready for this? Were you just like, this is for me, I've got this?
In terms of like the essays,
or whatever, like just the whole contest.
Yeah, well, I think so. I think that is the case to a pretty significant extent, because I've had an unusual career path and a pretty wide diversity of experiences. But certainly, like, my time at Goblin Artisans prepared me very well for all the design stuff. And I think that the thinking I've done about game design and about teaching and things like that, and about writing, all of that, I would say, informed my essays and my perspectives.
Sure.
So yeah, I'd say that's the case.
All right. Well, enough about writing. Let's get on to like actual design stuff. So the next trial was the multiple choice test, which you got 35 out of, or 73 out of 75, which was the lowest score you could get. It was a really, really tight margin.
I was sweating so hard when they announced that 73 was the cutoff, because like the few days before that, I'd been thinking, oh man, I definitely got above 70. I'm gonna make it in.
Right.
And then, ooh.
Yep. So we conferred ahead of time, and you told me which questions you missed. This is one of them. Mm-hmm. In fact, actually, both of them sound like they were kind of the same problem space.
Yes, they were, and I made the same mistake on both of them.
Okay, so you want to walk through this one here, then? What you were thinking?
Yes. So I looked at this card and I saw, it's only a 3/2, and it does provide card advantage, but in mostly a 1-for-1 way, right? Like you're losing an artifact to draw a card, and it takes mana. So it's not really very splashy. I felt like this looks like a signpost uncommon in a red-blue uncommon that you would pull you into a draft archetype in an artifact-heavy set like Kaladesh or Mirrodin or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I was wrong. And pretty much everyone else agreed, no, this is a rare. This can draw you a bunch of cards and provide a lot of filtering. So that was just a mistake on my part.
Sure. It's interesting that repeated card draw is obviously, generally speaking, repeated card draw is rare, but like a looter is uncommon. And is this really that different from a looter? I mean,
yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think there's an argument to be made either way. What might push it over rare is, the fact that it provides card selection at such a strong level, right? Like you're not just looting, but you're like scrying. You're kind of scry looting, which is pretty powerful.
And I generally agree with you. I didn't even think about it. I was just like, this is rare.
Yeah.
But I can see the argument. And so the second question is a similar one about rarity.
Yeah, and here, like, I think I was sort of I made the mistake of thinking this was rare instead of mythic rare. And I think the mistake I was making was I was sort of thinking in a worst case scenario, like, what if you don't have a board, right? Which is often the case in Constructed, which is where mythic rares are going to get played a little more. If you don't have a board, then is this then what happens? This is just Zombify.
Right. Well,
right? Or sorry, or it's Zombify from any graveyard.
It's double Zombify, even if it's just because it pulls the creature back and becomes a copy. So
right, sorry, it's Zombify plus clone, which didn't feel mythic to me. That felt rare.
Right.
But just because it only feels rare in the worst case scenario, like the best case scenario is like your whole team becomes the best creature that's been played this game. Like obviously that's a mythic effect. So again, just sort of a
close call.
Yeah, I think me underestimating the extent to which, or overestimating the extent to which, like splash, the amount of splash required for something to be rare or mythic rare. Right. So the same mistake in both of those, which was useful for me to think about, going through the competition.
Right. Yeah, I definitely think that, at least as a designer, the dividing line for mythic really is just, is it super splashy? Is this card going to completely change the game and make the whole game about whatever you just did? That doesn't hold true once you get to later stages of development, or I guess play design as they call it now. Sometimes you can make, you get to the point where you have this 2-mana, like Lotus Cobra being the canonical example of a mythic that not really very splashy, but we can agree on that one. So was there any other questions you felt were worth talking about? You mentioned a couple other ones that you were kind of unsure of, but you got them right. So
I did. So 17 I was nervous about because untapping is both blue and green, and curiosity is also blue and green.
Right.
But the wording on it was deals damage to an opponent and not deals combat damage to an opponent. And that's an obsolete wording by and large. And so I thought it might be a trap.
Yeah.
So I looked at this yesterday since we were talking about it, and Morrow's justification for why untap card name at the end of your turn is not okay is not what I would have expected, actually. So my justification was, at the end of your turn, untap card name, that ability is functionally vigilance.
Right.
Right?
Which is green but not blue.
Right. Whereas what Morrow said was untapping your own stuff is blue but not green. Like green gets untapping but not on the creature itself.
Right.
So I'm not sure.
And I wouldn't have guessed either, because my guess would have been that the reason I did D felt better to me, even if both A and D felt better to me, but I dismissed A because I thought that blue generally doesn't get untap, it gets tap or untap. Like, it's very rare that blue, it happens, like Vizier of the Sands or whatever did it, but generally we try to put both, but I guess that wouldn't make sense on this creature, so maybe that's very interesting.
Anyway, fortunately, D just seemed to make the most sense, and I thought that was probably too subtle a trap for them to use, so I did pick the right one there.
I mean, you say that, but a couple of later things were pretty subtle. I don't know if any of these other ones talk about anything like that. So this one was pretty controversial.
Oh, yeah. So I've thought about this question a lot in retrospect, and I actually think it's pretty fair, which is that itself is, I think, a controversial opinion. But, okay, so find a similar card and make it one cheaper. That is pretty clearly indefensible, right? Like, make it one cheaper that seems like a recipe for just like, I want my card to be undercosted. It doesn't matter seems like dodging the question. Pick the strongest cost that isn't broken. Like, the whole point is that you're a designer. You're not a play designer. You're not really qualified to judge what is or isn't going to be broken. You need to be asking Melissa these questions. And the reason I think this was a fair question to ask people is because they've said in many articles over the years that there's always a development rep or a play design rep on the design team to help with costing, that there's a person there whose job specifically is to do that. So why would you not ask that person?
Right.
So I think this question, and actually a few other questions on the multiple choice test, like, if you thought carefully about what the role of the designer they're trying to hire in Wizards is, then you wouldn't fall into certain traps.
Right. I see it more of a, and this may not be the right way to get to the answer, but the way I read this question is, sorry, ignore the second sentence. Just read the first sentence.
Mhm.
You've designed a card and you want the play design team to like it. What do? You go talk to the play design team and you say, what do you think of this and what can I do to make this good in your eyes?
Yeah. Now, I understand that people criticize the wording of this, that like, what does it mean? I want them to like it. Shouldn't I want them to like everything I design? But, you had to read between the lines a bit and intuit what situation was going on there.
It's actually a pretty common situation in R&D where you've got a set full of cards and 80% of them don't make a huge deal. They could turn into any other card. Not literally any other card, but they could change a lot and it wouldn't matter. The set would still be the set. But you've got, some number of cards that are really core to the identity of the set. And then within that, usually there's a handful of cards that as a designer, you really believe are linchpins for the design or just really cool rares or whatever that you think really deserve to exist. And you take those cards and you do what you can to make sure they survive the transition over the various stages of design because you care about them, you want them to work. Doesn't mean they're going to definitely stay, but if you just hand the set over to play design and say, here's the set, and you don't tell them what cards you think are the best cards or the coolest cards or your favorite cards, you're losing a lot of information because everybody likes Magic for different reasons. So that's I think to me that's what this is referring to, and I don't know how much Rosewater has talked about this in articles, but that's definitely a thing that R&D does. They definitely make sure to communicate that I like this card or this card is important to the set.
I mean, that makes perfect sense. I do feel like that's a little bit inside baseball. Like it would be hard for an external job applicant to understand that was the context of this.
Yep.
And
I don't think that was I don't think that was the thing you had to know to answer this question, right? I was just
No, not really.
And I think there was one more question you said you had a little bit of unsurety about when you answered. Which of the following is the most important reason that some cards' mana costs are higher than others?
Like in many senses, the right answer is obvious, right? It's like, of course, you want to cast your Llanowar Elves on turn 1 and your Crawworm on turn 6. That's why. But so that cards can be different is so vague that it could be true. That is, in some sense, it's not an incorrect answer. It's merely a less specific version of the correct answer.
Right.
So I kind of, that was a question where I felt like they should have worked harder to write better wrong answers.
Right. It feels like a test trick rather than a testing your knowledge kind of thing, which is never fun to lose to. But you got it right, so you made it past this step.
But it felt very, very close. It could have gone the other way, and I'm very glad it didn't.
Do you feel like there could have been more questions? Do you have any ideas on questions that might have helped to create a more distinguishing spread of people? Like, clearly there were a lot of easy questions on that test. So,
yeah. So, I think they absolutely could have gotten rid of a lot of those easy questions. What I would like to have seen was more questions about exactly the things they were going to be critical about during the actual top 8, right? When they talk about play patterns, when they talk about, how things read to players, all of these subtleties that we were getting critiques on week after week. I felt like many of those really the interesting and subtle skills didn't get addressed in the multiple choice exam, and I think they could have been. Right? Like, what if you had a question that was like, here's a design. Which of the following is the biggest problem with this design? Right? A, it's too powerful for standard. B, it creates repetitive play. C, it's overcosted.
Right. D, it's an onboard trick. It's complicated. Yeah.
Exactly. Onboard tricks need a mana cost. All these subtle little things that you could not just look up by looking at the the Mechanical Color Pie article, where it's just not worth having answers that you can Google because the top 100 are not going to miss any of those questions.
Right. Or, maybe have 10, 15 as a warm-up, but not 50, right? Okay. Cool. So then we went on to trial 3, which was design 10 cards. So this was the one where you followed in my shoes. So I'm going to talk about that for a second. For GDS 1, it was very much about trying to find a way to stand out, as we talked about earlier. And for GDS 1, I don't remember the exact design test, but there was a lot less. It wasn't nearly as strict as this one was. I think you only got 6 cards, and you had to make one of each color and one of each type, which led you to have to do something weird in order to get all 5 colors in, but also have a land and an artifact, which meant you either had a gold card, or you made a colored land, or a colored artifact, or an artifact creature. Like, there's a few different ways you could do it. And
I think your casting costs had to go from 1 to 6 or something, or 1 to 5, and 0 for the land.
I think they just had to have. I just think they just had to have unique casting costs.
Oh, unique casting costs, yeah.
And they had no other restrictions on there. You could make new mechanics. There might have been some rarity restrictions, but I don't think there were. So it might have been very similar to this. It wasn't as strict as this, but it was in that ballpark.
Yeah.
But it wasn't as hard. There wasn't a matrix of things. You didn't have to, the 2-color combination thing is very hard for this one.
It is. Yeah, absolutely.
And so I looked at that and I said, well, a lot of people are just going to take their 4 favorite designs that they've ever made, regardless of what they do in a vacuum or in a set, and then they'll fill in those last 2 holes with whatever they can come up with on the fly, because you probably don't have a blue artifact sitting around if that's your choice. And instead, I took the opposite approach, and I said, well, there's a lot of weird restrictions that are going to create some interesting patterns here. Let's use those restrictions and figure out how each one of those could turn into a thing you would base a set around. And so how do I make a land that represents what a set could be based around? Because that's hard, actually. Most lands are just mana fixing. Or how do I get a colored artifact? What does that mean? Because at that point, we hadn't done any colored artifacts. That was before Esper, before whatever. We hadn't done an enchantment set, so I mixed enchantment and creature on the same thing to save myself a slot for something else later. And so I ended up with 6 cards, and the whole point was that each card was supposed to represent sort of a face card that tells you what a set could be about, a mechanical basis. And apparently I wasn't the only person to have done that, but I did take a lot of pride in Aaron's response to that, where he basically said, Alexis is one of the many people who claim to create 6 cards representing 6 different sets, but I think she's the only person who actually pulled it off. So maybe it wasn't as unique as I thought it was at the time, but I think it helped. So I believe, maybe you can talk from here, but I believe you took a similar approach.
Absolutely. So I cut my teeth on the GDS too. I started card design by designing cards for Ethan and Sean and Scott and Devin Rule and Jonathan Woodward and Jay, all those people. And so I sort of had it in my head that set design is where it's at. Designing cards for a generic world is boring. Individual card design is boring. Every card you design should belong in some set or some world. Now there are issues with this attitude, but that's sort of my background and where I was coming from. So I was very surprised when GDS 3 turned out to be a bit of a throwback to GDS 1 in that it was about individual cards. And when I got this design test, I was like, all right, I'm going to show off as many sets as I can. And I didn't notice that the instructions for this design test were actually a little different from the GDS 1 design test, where I think they'd explicitly told you that your cards should all be from different sets.
They certainly didn't say what they did this time, which was something along the lines of all of your cards should come from an unnamed standard legal set.
Yeah, so the thing is, they weren't super specific about that either, to be frank. The instructions came in the original instructions they sent us, they didn't even mention standard legal. So I was like, all right, I'm going to have a commander card. I'm going to have a conspiracy card, right? I was all ready for this. And then we got multiple errata in different stages from Mark explaining what they actually wanted.
Well, that's harsh.
I mean, it happens.
Right, sure.
But I did not internalize what they actually wanted, which was 10 just individually cool designs. We don't care about them representing a particular world.
Right.
And so I tried really hard to represent a bunch of worlds, which is why I ended up putting my first design as this silly common which wasn't even really a common, except for it had an unkeyworded block mechanic on it.
Right.
So it could have been a common, like if it hit that had been keyworded. But anyway, so I kind of messed it up. But fortunately, I had enough individually strong designs in there that they were like, okay, I'm not sure why you did this with your commons, but the rest of these are pretty good.
Right. Yeah, I think maybe you threaded the needle. You did something a little bit crazy and you got away with it. And in the end, you ended up designing cards that actually caught their attention by doing that, which that's good. It's interesting because this design aside, I feel like every test after this was very geared towards proving that you could be a workhorse designer, that you could design nuts and bolts cards or design cards for, sets that already had a concept and already kind of knew a direction, which is even more, I don't know the right word, normal than like GDS1. GDS1 had a lot of kind of out there challenges, like the unset challenge and things like that.
Oh,
and
yeah,
you didn't have
crazy.
anything like that.
I was praying they would not give us an unset challenge
because I hated that one so much.
I would not have known what to do.
So what was your favorite card from this design?
So my favorite card, probably unsurprisingly, was Mugai Creation Saga, the one that the judges liked so much, the one that makes bears and draws cards equal to the number of you draw cards equal to the number of creatures you have, and you make bears equal to, oh, there it is.
Right.
Yeah. And you do them in either order, so you get kind of either X of one thing and X plus Y of the other, or X plus Y of one thing and Y of the other.
Right.
It took me a while to come up with this, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so cute. Clearly I overcosted it because I was looking at cards like Tishana and being like, ooh, this is too much. But like 9 mana is kind of ridiculous. Like in my original Google Doc, when I had these in order by, you were supposed to order your designs for like which ones you thought were best.
I loved that.
And
I loved that criteria. That was awesome.
I actually thought it was extremely helpful because I did that. And then I kept looking at my 10th best design and being like, well, let's replace this. Right? Like if this is my worst design, let's come up with a better one until it's no longer my worst design. And I did that a few times until I sort of ran out of steam.
Yeah, you literally just recreated what R&D does with sets. That's pretty awesome. I mean, maybe
nice.
not quite that structured, but they will constantly knock out 10% of the cards that aren't really doing any work or seem kind of flawed in some way, and then they'll do a bunch of hole filling, and then they'll just keep turning.
Yeah, so I found this so useful, in fact, that I did this on future challenges as well. I would rank my cards and then take card number 10 and kill it.
Right. Well, that's a really cool lesson that I don't think has come up until now, so thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Is there anything you would have changed here? I mean, I guess you talked about the casting cost.
Oh, you mean on this particular card?
With the whole challenge. Like, what would you have done differently?
I mean, I think if I'd known what they wanted, I would have forgotten about trying to suggest particular worlds, and in particular, like, I used some card names to suggest worlds, right? Like my alternate win condition card was Nixian Ascension, which specifically says Theros, and then Mark was like, this card is fine except for it only goes in Theros, and I was like, well, if I just change the name, like, it could go into another set. Right. So that's an easy thing. Obviously I would have made my commons just much simpler, show them I can do basics. Right. Basically, the feedback I got was like, stop showing off. You're being too out there.
Right.
And I was fine receiving that feedback, because when I sent in my submission, I was like, this is really tame. And that's why I had that ridiculous card that makes a mountain forest elemental creature token. I was like, I want to show them something ridiculous, something completely out there, just to show that, like, I'm not, utterly afraid to step outside of the box.
Right. Well, luckily for you, like, every challenge after this had more and more commons in it, so you had lots of chances to get commons right.
Yes, I did.
Have you put any thought into cycling this card out? I thought about it. It sounds pretty hard.
Yeah, I think it would be extremely hard. So I came up with one, but it's mono black.
Right.
Which is do both of these in either order. The first one is target opponent discards a number of cards equal to the power of the largest creature you control.
Right.
And the second one is zombify from any graveyard.
Right. Okay, yeah, that's interesting. I do think this card could be mono green, so maybe it's probably more likely to be a monocolored cycle.
That would be easier than a double monocolored.
A little bit.
Double, yeah. Yeah,
cool.
That's true. It is mono green.
Anything else you want to say about this challenge? Any feedback that stood out, or?
Nope.
Cool. So this got you in, and then we move on to challenge 1, which was the first sort of public challenge after the top 8. And this was called You Might As Well Tribal. In this challenge, you were supposed to pick a tribe and make 2 of each rarity, so 8 total cards. And I think the thing that struck me most about this challenge was that you weren't allowed to make new mechanics.
Yeah.
Which kind of held all the way through, except for the one challenge where that was the thing, which I thought was kind of weird. Like, we want you to make it's cards for a whole new set that's tribal in some way we've never done, but don't make a new mechanic. So,
yeah, I mean, on the one hand, I can see why they did it, because if one whole challenge is make a mechanic, like,
right,
then like it's sort of a little silly if you're allowed to make mechanics within other challenges. But on the other hand, that was a major and difficult restriction to work with.
Yeah. The other restriction that was kind of counterintuitive to a tribal set was that every card had to actually be tribal in some way. You couldn't just have a workhorse, 2/2 bear that had prowess or whatever. It had to somehow refer to the creature type. Even if it made obvious sense how this card could fit into your tribal set, it still had to be tribal in some way. So.
Yeah, and I got in trouble for that because I thought, like, an insect that makes more insects when it dies, of course that's a tribal card.
Right, exactly.
But, cares about was sort of, and it's not a particularly well-defined term in my opinion. So apparently just making insect tokens doesn't mean you care about insects.
Right, and even though it said insect on the card. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's sort of the difference between sort of how a mathematician thinks and how a normal human thinks a little bit.
That's fair. Which side are you on?
I'm a mathematician. But I'm doing my best to learn.
That's okay. You'll be in good company. So what was your favorite card of this bunch?
I liked that uncommon I made that was Skullmoth Larva. It's the 2/2 that you tap another insect to monstrosity it. So monstrosity I liked because it hits the insect trope of metamorphosis. And the tapping other insects thing I liked because I was going for the trope of insects as communal creatures, right? Like an ant colony is a superorganism. And so like they care for their young and they're actually a very organized society. And so I wanted to get that in there. And so I felt like this card it captured a lot of the things I wanted, like both mechanically and flavor-wise.
Right. Yeah, this card does kind of sum up your entire submission, really, in a lot of ways. Yeah. It's cool. I do think insects are one of the most tribal, non-sentient creature types.
Yeah.
Kind of cool.
That's one of the reasons I picked them, actually, is because tribal is not just let's make a bunch of awesome cards this creature type. Like it's making cards that care about each other.
Right.
And therefore, like the more organized and social your creature type is, the more you're going to get natural resonance in that way.
Right.
Which is why I think Jeremy Geist was so successful with his rogues as like a team planning a heist. Like I just thought that it kind of made super good sense all by itself.
Right. Yeah, you and Jeremy definitely had a head and shoulders above everyone else submissions that were about sort of teamwork, how these creature types would actually create an actual team rather than just I care about samurai. I also care about samurai. I care about samurai too, as one of 6 other examples. So I think the place everyone struggled actually turned out to be a lot of times the mythics. How do you feel about mythic tribal cards?
I mean, I thought that was, to be frank, I thought that was a little silly. Like, I think they should have given us 1 more common and 1 fewer mythic.
Right.
Or even 0 mythics.
I can't imagine. I can't imagine a set with 2 tribal mythics for the same creature type. I don't see that ever happening.
Right. So I don't know. Maybe they wanted us to to like show that we could design good splashy mythics.
Right.
Since they wouldn't have seen that in the design test, right? Because like you might use both your mythic slots on planeswalkers, and like no one can really design planeswalkers, so that doesn't count.
Right. That was a really common problem we saw.
Yeah. I don't know. I think it was a little silly, and that was definitely the part I struggled with the most. Was coming up with good mythics. Like the Hive Queen was right away, right? It's like, of course, if you're going to have a legendary, a mythic rare insect, then it should be the Queen of the Hive.
Right.
The other one, I messed around with it a lot, and I iterated on a few different concepts, and what I came up with was okay, but not, it wasn't as resonant as the Hive Queen, certainly.
I've got a question from chat. Did you consider Transform instead of Monstrosity as a different insect flavor for that metamorphosis?
I didn't, and I think Transform could have been fine for that. I'm reluctant to do stuff with double-faced cards, not because I don't think they're good. I think they're awesome, but because they're a little too easy. Like, you can do so much, like they're such a powerful thing. I feel like Wizards is going to want to mine that design space very, very slowly, just like they are with Planeswalkers.
Right, very, very deliberately.
Yeah. So in this case, to go from a larva to a moth, all you need to do is get a little bigger and fly.
Right.
And I could do that without a double-faced card, so I was just like, Monstrosity is perfect.
It makes a lot of sense, yeah. Was anything else from this challenge that you wanted to talk about? Any feedback? Any other cards?
Yeah, so I mean, I was playing it pretty safe with this challenge, mostly in response to my feedback from the design test. But like, I always feel like when somebody gives you feedback, it's better to overcorrect than to undercorrect, right? Because it's better for them to say like, "Oh, you listened to me too much, now do less," than for them to say, "I don't think you listened to me quite enough," Like, it's better, but still not good enough. You never want to be
or
in
at
that
all.
situation.
Like, that'd be the worst case scenario. They're like, "You're
"Oh,
still out there, Ari. Can you design a good common?"
Yeah, so I wanted to show, all right, my commons are definitely commons, and I think I succeeded at that.
Absolutely, you had some really good commons. And I actually remember I judged this challenge, and I remember my final feedback was basically, "You did crazy, you did workhorse. Now let's see it together." So you definitely, I think, hit the note you were going for. And then you did succeed in mixing them later, so that's cool. So let's move on to challenge number 2.
Yeah.
The Circus Act.
Oh, the circus.
Which was sort of flavorful top-down design for Bigtopia, the circus, of course. And you had to make cards that had exactly the names that they gave you, which was really cool. Here's a list of names for anybody watching at home. The only exception being for legends, you could tweak the name to make it sound more legendary.
Which I appreciated. I thought that was a really nice way for us to be able to make our legends sound appropriate. Because you can't make a mythic rare card and just call it Magician. Like, that's...
Right. So, other than possibly the circus, which we can talk about in a second, I think this was the challenge that came the closest to feeling like something I would see an R&D person actually doing. Because when they start with some sets are very top-down, like Innistrad, and one of the things they do is they literally write a bunch of card names on the whiteboard, and then people start designing to those card names. They'll write down, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and they'll write down whatever else.
Right.
And then they'll just design a bunch of cards to try and fit those names to see if they can come up with those cards. So it did feel. I know a lot of people reading at home might have said like, "That's crazy designing to exact card names," but it's actually very close to what is real.
So I actually found that to be entirely reasonable. I think the problem I had was that there were a lot of additional restrictions on top of that, right? That there were color restrictions and there were rarity restrictions.
Yeah, I mean, that's just to make your life miserable, I guess.
Yeah, and I felt like I didn't need additional misery on top of the difficulty of already, like, designing cards for these specific tropes.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. I wonder if that actually added anything. I mean, certainly for trial number 3, it made sense for them to make your life as difficult as possible. They want to narrow the field as much as possible with the card designs for the very first trial. But kind of after that, giving you the space to work with what you thought was meaningful and useful probably would have made a little bit more sense. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Not sure.
This was a tricky challenge for me. Oh yeah. So here's a comment from the chat, which I think is very emblematic of what I'm talking about. Is like sword swallowing was a card name you could use, but you could not use sword swallower, right? And that's not a restriction that like R&D would ever do in real life, right? Like they would. And I think that was a little unfortunate. Not that I specifically designed cards that were like, you know, Olaf, the strongest man in the multiverse, instead of feats of strength. But it would have been nice if I'd been able to. Like, I think that would have opened things up, and that would have also like made it more differentiation between the cards that different contestants chose, because we did end up overlapping quite a lot. Right.
Everybody designed a magician. Almost everybody designed a unicycle. Almost everybody did a clown car or an acrobatics. Yeah. There were some pretty easy ones to hit. So what was your favorite card from this set?
I really liked my clown car. So my clown car was a vehicle that you drew a card when it attacked for each creature that crewed it. And what this sets up is this incentive to pack all of your creatures into this tiny little vehicle. Originally, this was a 1/1, in fact, to just point out how tiny it is.
Right.
But then my playtesters were like, hey, this is just like a sorcery that says tap all your creatures and draw that many cards, because like the 1/1 attacks and dies.
Right.
So changing it to a 1/4, like maybe it should have been a 1/3, but the point was, I like top-down designs that aren't just, you know, it makes clown token, you know, it's that it says clown car, so it's a vehicle that does something with clowns, but like they specifically behave like the trope behaves. And here, what defines a clown car is that everyone gets in it, and you have all these people in this ridiculously tiny vehicle. And so that was very much the play pattern that was set up here. And my playtesters loved it. They said like they were laughing aloud when they were like throwing like, you know, a Baloth and a Vidalkin and 2 elves and you know,
the Baloth in the car.
everyone get in the car.
Get in the car.
Yeah, and instead I got in trouble for using vehicles because they're deciduous. So whoops, my bad.
Because you also used Converge on.
I did
on one card,
which I think was probably a mistake. Like I was thinking like a mathematician, where like the word converge didn't matter to me. What mattered was like, oh, this uses diversity of mana types. That's like the colorful interest of a circus. Right? And I didn't think that the word converge doesn't sound like a circus so much.
Right.
And that it certainly doesn't sound like feats of strength. Like, how is that convergence? Like, it doesn't make any sense. If you think about the word, if you think about the mechanic and you were able to rename the mechanic, then I feel like it could make sense. But yeah, not a good decision.
Yeah, but on a top-down set, when you're doing top-down design, it probably hit you harder than it would have otherwise on a later set.
Yes, absolutely.
Was there anything else in this challenge that you wanted to talk about? Any interesting feedback or other cards?
Not really. I mean, I feel like everything that needs to be said about whether a unicycle is a vehicle or equipment has already been said. So
it's obviously an equipment. Let's move on.
We can move on.
So challenge number 3, finding a good mechanic. So this was the one time you were allowed to make a mechanic.
Yes.
Because that was the point. Make a mechanic, make 3 commons, 2 uncommons, 2 rares, and a mythic. Use 3 colors. Actually pretty basic restrictions. Nothing too complicated.
Mm-hmm.
And this was...
Which I liked.
I think the most interesting thing about this from my perspective was that last challenge was probably your low point. That was where I believe the judges ranked you 6 out of 7, and this is where you kind of started to get your game back together. You were kind of middle of the pack here, and then you kind of kept going up from there. So,
yeah.
Do you have anything to say about that? What do you attribute that to?
So two things. First, I didn't know that I was 6 out of 7 on the circus challenge.
Right.
Which is probably good because I think I would have been more demoralized than I was if I'd realized just how low they'd ranked me. And probably a little frustrated because, I didn't 100% agree with all of the judges' feedback from the circus challenge. But I think one reason it was very easy for me to just continue working hard on those challenges as if nothing were different and as if I were, just sort of moving on directly, is that in real life, when I'm not a magic designer, I'm a musician. Mm-hmm. I'm a classical musician. And we get a lot of rejections. Mm-hmm. We get a lot of negative feedback if we're lucky. Like if you're lucky, you go to an audition, and if they don't take you, they say, we liked your voice, but your sight reading isn't good enough for this group, or something like that. Mm-hmm. If you're unlucky, you just get no feedback and a rejection, or you don't even get a rejection. You just get nothing. Right. You never hear from them again, and you have to wonder what went wrong. So you have to develop like a really thick skin and be ready to bounce back and sort of be like, I don't care, whatever, next thing, I am going to go, next thing, right? Right. And so that was the attitude I had, no matter how well or poorly I did in any challenges. Like, okay, fine, next thing, let's go.
Yeah, I think that's a great skill in a lot of things. So in this challenge, you went with the revered mechanic. Mm-hmm. I've got Mushroom Kami up here as an example, the revered 2 card that also gives you saplings for each creature that revered it. So from this challenge perspective, is there anything you would have done differently? Anything you, in retrospect, you wish you'd changed? Yeah,
so to be honest, and I wrote about this a bit on Goblin Artisans, I actually think this and not the Circus Week was my weakest submission. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not saying I didn't deserve to be 3rd this week, because I think a lot of people struggled with the mechanic challenge. I think It was just hard for everyone. But I think this was my weakest submission, and I just didn't I didn't have the time or energy that weekend to be as creative and thoughtful as I would have liked. Right. If I were doing it again, I think I might have chosen an entirely different keyword. I had a few other candidates that I was considering. I think that the feedback I got from the judges this week, I agreed with almost entirely. Like, I really agreed with Eric Lauer when he was like, these all cost 4 to 6, and you always want to revere all of them. There's just nothing, there aren't enough choices to make here, right. And you're showing us very little of the design space. Mm-hmm. So if I were to stick with this, I would have played around with it in different ways, making, a 1-drop 1/1 flyer with revered ones. So just to see what that's right. Like. Or a creature where it gets a bonus if you don't revere it for whatever reason. I mean, The flavor's a little wacky that way, but that makes it a much more interesting choice. I also thought Melissa's suggestion, use -1/-1 counters instead so that it's automatically a choice, was very interesting. Obviously the flavor would have to change completely, but I thought that was... I think that's an automatic way to get some cool tension, and then you can use the -1/-1 counters. You could remove those as a cost, which would make it feel even better when you activated that ability. Right. That kind of thing. There's a lot of people have talked about this on Reddit and stuff, and I think there's absolutely. So many different directions that this mechanic could have gone, and I just didn't find any of them. So I was disappointed with myself about that.
Sure. I mean, but at the same time, that's what team collaboration is about. A lot of mechanics and R&D, you start with 3 versions of it, and then you end up with 5 more versions, and so on and so forth. You said you think that this was your worst submission. That might actually be true, even though you did better relatively on this one, because like you said, there was a lot of... Making mechanics is really hard, and the submissions for this, I remember being full of a lot of things that I'm like, didn't quite get there. So... Yeah. You might actually be right. This might be your worst submission, but this is one of those... This challenge, unlike the previous challenges, I think everybody struggled at, which is why I think you were in the middle of the pack.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to say here before we move on to Challenge 4?
Oh yeah, something I do want to say is the very first version of this mechanic I did not make up myself, and I didn't remember that until well after this was over. But there was a Goblins Artisans regular called James Bartolotti who a few years ago made a card. It wasn't with revered as it is here. It was unbounded. It was just tap as many creatures as you want, and I think that was actually when we were doing like our homebrew set design thing and we were choosing an Egyptian theme, and Jay was like, here's a weekend art challenge, make a card for our Egyptian set, and he made this like revered cat goddess thing. And even at the time I was like, oh, this is really cool, except for I would probably put a limit on how many creatures you can tap. Right. And then I forgot about that, and like several years later I used it in the GDS3, and I feel really bad that I did not attribute him at the time. Or maybe if I'd remembered that it was not my original invention, I might have just chosen to use something else.
Right.
But that's the problem, kind of the problem with Goblin Artisans, is like I've been doing it so many years and seen so many cards and mechanics. I think all my ideas are my ideas, but it's really hard to remember if I saw something that somebody else did and was like, oh, that's cool, and then forgot that someone else did it.
Well, wait till you're in R&D where you try to do a bunch of stuff and everyone's going to say, well, we already tried that. It's kind of the opposite of that. But yeah, that's normal. Concurrent design is totally a thing.
Yep, absolutely.
So challenge 4, work of art. Pretty standard criteria in terms of what you can design, but the hard part was you had 10 different holes, so each hole had a color and a rarity and a description of what it had to be, and then you had to match those 10 holes up with 12 pieces of art, and some of that art was, well, most of the art's actually pretty bad for Magic cards. They all have a lot of problems, or a lot of them have problems with either color balance or focus or things like that.
But when you compare it to the art that you guys had to use for GDS1, like, they were very kind to us comparatively.
That's fair.
Like the GDS1 art,
I didn't go back and look, but I do remember that one being painful.
It was terrible. If you chat, you should go back and look at the art challenge they had to do for GDS1, because it was just ridiculous compared to this.
So we're on challenge 4 out of 5, and this is, at this point you started hitting your stride, and you did really good on this challenge, really good on the next one. I think you actually got first in terms of rankings. You know, it's a little bit, unclear if how much that actually mattered in the long run, but it was still there. So that was cool. Did you have anything else you want to talk about there? I think we already talked about you rebounding. So
yeah. So again, I think I had a high morale for this challenge because I felt like I knew exactly what they wanted. Right. It was like, okay, match the art, hit the specs, and, show off some new things as you do it. Right. Like, it was where the circus challenge, I felt like I really just didn't know what they wanted. Right. But here I felt I knew exactly what was going on. And even though it was only third, like, getting back in the top 3 made me more confident at, like, okay, the circus week was a fluke. I still belong at the top here. Right.
This card is pretty cool. Yeah, tell me about this one. Whispers of the Unreal. It's an enchantment.
Right. So what made... I did a lot of iteration to try to come up with a really exciting blue mythic. And the reason I'm proud of this one in particular is that I feel like it captures the art well. And that's not easy to do with this particular piece of artwork.
Right. For those who aren't paying, who can't necessarily see it on their screen, you've got a wizard on the right with some like blue magic coming out of their hands, and then the air around them is kind of warping to mesh with the trees around them to create a face out of the air. It's kind of a really weird illusion-like thing going on there. Which I missed when I first saw the art. When you see the art at the small size, it's very easy to miss that. It's kind of hiding there. So
yeah. What I like about this is that, like, the wizard is casting spells, and their spells are creating this like unreal thing, like you know, there's like some channel to the void that they're speaking through,
right?
And that's suddenly going to become this monster. And I kind of like, I mean, this is probably not really a good feature of magic art, but I kind of like that you take a moment to see the face, because that's like, oh God, there's something there. There's something giant there, right? And that's what I meant to capture with like the face down exiling of cards, so that your opponent does not know like how big a monster you're creating with that stuff. And there's some tension in there, right? Because like one way to try to abuse this card is to have a bunch of cheap cantrips, right? Because then you can get to 5 really quickly and get your creature really fast. But then if your deck is nothing but cheap cantrips, then it's only going to be a 5 trample and not anything bigger, right? And you might be discarding land some of the time. So there's some tension as to like what kind of deck do you put this into, and how do you build around it?
Right.
The judges didn't like it as much as I did.
Yeah.
But
Well, we all have our favorites. We all have different things we like about Magic. That's what makes Magic so great.
Yeah, and I understand that. Like, I think this is sort of less obviously printable than many of my other designs, but I think this is taking a very weird piece of art and making it work, which I felt like not all my designs did.
Right. But there's some pretty crazy art, so
yeah,
you did what you could with what you had. The other thing,
absolutely.
The other thing I found interesting about this challenge was if you read your Goblin Artisans article, you talk about actually making a matrix, and you even included kind of a picture of this spreadsheet where you took the art in columns and the restrictions in rows, and you kind of tried to figure out where the optimal points were. And I'm actually surprised that you didn't. I couldn't find you talking about that for any of the previous challenges. Did you do this for all of your challenges, or was this kind of a desperation move when you saw just what you were working with?
No, and it's possible I should have for like the design test when there were. Well, I mean, the thing is, for the design test, yeah, I guess I could have had like the 10 color pairs versus like the. But like you also had to mix and match like card types and rarities, so like. I don't think a two-dimensional matrix would have necessarily worked for a lot of the others. Like for the design test, what I did was like, and in general, what I did is for any of these tests is I start at the point of greatest constraint.
Right.
For the design test, that was planeswalkers, because I know that planeswalkers are extremely hard to design. So I picked my 2 best planeswalker designs that I could think of, and sort of worked around that. And sort of similarly for the insect challenge, like I had my uncommon skullmoth larva, right? The one that goes through metamorphosis. And so I'm like, okay, I know that's my uncommon creature. My mythic has to be the Hive Queen, because what else can your mythic be? I only have 1 creature left. It has to be at common, you know. Right. So mostly with other challenges, I just sort of did propagating constraints.
Right. Which is kind of what this is. It's just a different way of approaching it. I mean, this matrix is the same of like find either the best matches or the ones that are so hard that I have to take the best thing I can find and just live with it.
Yeah. I think the only reason I did this for this particular challenge was it was just easy to represent that information in matrix form in a way that I'm not sure I could have done for other challenges.
Right. That makes sense. All right, cool. Let's move on to the final challenge.
Yep.
Design challenge number 5, pack and play, where you got to pick a set and then make a booster pack from 14 or 15 completely new cards that were supposed to fit. So you picked Scars of Mirrodin here.
Yeah.
I was reading through some of your prior essays and things like that, and you talk about Lorwyn, you talk about Tarkir, you talk about Guild Pact, or you talk about Haunt at least. Were you tempted to pick any of those other sets, or were you like, what led you to Scars of Mirrodin specifically?
I mean, Scars of Mirrodin, I think, has really great flavor, which is going to seem, I mean, so it's not a top-down set, right? But I think it's the set that tells a story via mechanics most effectively. Mm-hmm. Like, for example, Innistrad, fantastic top-down set, tons of amazing flavor. But the story of Innistrad, as represented in mechanics, is not that interesting, right? It's not that compelling compared to I think there were a lot of really clever and subtle things done with Scars of Mirrodin block that portrayed the sort of the infiltration and then the war and then, the disastrous defeat. And I think the mechanics proliferate and infect are both just like solid A mechanics, which they have not yet brought back and have a lot of space left in them.
Cool. Well, I'm not gonna argue. I was on the Scars of Mirrodin team. It was one of my favorite teams. Has my favorite card ever, Wormcoil Engine.
Yes.
Say that anytime I get a chance. So what was your...
I have to tell you a Wormcoil Engine story, actually. Wormcoil Engine, I have to confess, in GDS2, we were supposed to pick a card that we said should not have been printed. And in my essay, I said Wormcoil Engine because it was such a strong colorless finisher with lifelink,
right,
that like it invalidated other cards,
right?
That like black would never play other, which
right.
was not actually that true because this was the Age of Titans, so there were a lot of ridiculous 6-drops. Anyway, I love Wormcoil Engine, and I am sorry that I said that in my essay about it.
It's okay, I forgive you. So what was your favorite card from this challenge?
Right. So, my favorite card from this challenge was the Blighted Slith.
Yes, that card's cool.
So one of the first things I did when I was thinking, okay, what am I going to put in here, was I Googled Mirrodin and just went to the MTG wiki or whatever that website is, and I looked at cycles from the original Mirrodin, and there was the Slith. And I was like, oh my gosh, they never made a Phyrexian version of the Slith. That's something that you could totally do with -1/-1 counters. Just have it, take off the counters to have it grow bigger instead of putting on counters to make it, Yeah, and so I thought that would be a cool thing to do. Originally, this was a 4/4 with 3 -1/-1 counters.
It's huge.
Yeah, and that's a mistake because 1 + 2 + 3 + 4 is 10.
Right.
And so I was like, oh, let's make it a 3/3. It's less exciting that way, but more likely to not get cut by play design.
Right. Yeah, I thought this was a really cool design. I grew up playing Whirling Dervish, so the GG creature that gets bigger over time is kind of got.
Oh yeah. Now that is old school.
That is very old school. Card that actually used to get played back when creatures were terrible.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was that was strong because Necropotence was so dominant for so long. You needed serrated arrows to stop Whirling Dervish.
Yeah, protection from black was a big deal.
Oh yeah.
Cool. Did you
chat? You can tell how old we are.
Yep. Oh dear. Was there any feedback that kind of surprised you, given that you talked about how you knew Scars really well and you obviously did some research too? So was there any kind of...
Yeah. So they said green infect creatures had higher toughness than power, and I think I didn't actually know that. Although if you'd asked me to name all of the green and black infect creatures, I think I probably could have named at least all the common ones. Mm-hmm. So maybe I should have noticed that. And so they dinged me. They basically didn't ding me at all for that because they were like, yeah, that's not a reasonable thing for somebody who wasn't on the design team to have thought about. The judges were a little like, well, we wouldn't print this card because that card's already in the set. And I was like, but
right.
I thought we were changing the set. Like, surely I'm not just adding these cards on top of the existing set. But, I wasn't going to worry too much about that because they ranked me first again. They clearly liked enough of the cards. I was like, fine, whatever.
They flew you out to Renton. Must have been good.
Yeah. And I would have changed my uncommon equipment. I think it went to a weird place and was sort of trying to be a little too clever with like it dealing damage instead of the
that actually confused me when I reviewed your set.
Yeah.
Took me about 10 minutes before somebody pointed out that it was the equipment dealing damage and not the creature, and I'm like, oh, that makes it way different.
Yeah.
So yeah, you got to fly out to Renton.
Yes.
You got a tour. You got all sorts of cool stuff. How did you prepare for this?
Not as much as I should have, maybe. I don't know.
I mean, I'm not even sure what you could do. I was just curious if you had any war stories.
Well, so one thing I did was I suspected that the final challenge would be the same kind of thing as it was for GDS1 and GDS2, because it had been the same in GDS2 and GDS1. Right. Put everyone in 3 different rooms to replace a card, then lock everyone in a meeting room, and in 1 hour they have to come up with a replacement as a team. So I thought that was going to happen, and so I asked the Goblin Artisans crew to practice with me, because I thought they would enjoy it a lot, and it would be helpful for me to try it out. So Jay Treat and Ryan Siegel-Stechler and I played the role of the finalists in Renton, and Jay Zephyrin got to be Mark Rosewater and make the challenge. Right. And he made a really evil challenge for us. Oh, and Trevor Cashmore was there as the rest of R&D, as the other judges. Jay Zephyrin as Morrow made this super evil challenge. He had us replace a green rare from Ether Revolt, except for we weren't allowed to use the original art. We had to use this, I think, Kaladesh splash art, which had like Saheeli standing in front of the city, and it didn't look anything like a green rare. Right. Ouch. Yeah, so it was ridiculous and hard. It was hard for us because we were doing it over Skype, and the connection was not perfect, and obviously that's not as good as being in a room together where you can write stuff on a board and talk face to face. But it was still enlightening and productive, and Ryan Siegel-Stechler came up with an awesome design, and we ended up using something that it drew more on his design than anything else, but it kind of drew on all of our designs in terms of inspiration and name. And we came up with something that I'm not sure they would have printed it, but it was a lot better than anything we'd started with. So it was still a productive meeting. Did you walk away with that with any lessons, anything you felt like you took with you? Yes. So one thing I took with me, so while we were talking about those cards, like there was this one design that I was like, oh yeah, that's like Waiting in the Weeds from Mirage. And everyone was like, what? And I was like, the card that makes cat tokens. And then later on, I was like, oh, we could make it all creatures and artifacts tap for any color. And they were like, oh, you mean like Cryptolith, right? And I'm like, what? So I realized, I know cards from Fallen Empires and Mirage better than I know recent sets. And I was like, because I learned them back when I was young and still had greater brain plasticity or something. I don't know. And I was like, gosh, I need to, do some studying about what's been printed in the last few years, because it's going to be really embarrassing if they let me out of that room and I have a card that has already been printed. Right. Let's talk about the day. You started with I've got a shot of you in front of Mitzi here. You started with a tour. Yep. I'm not going to ask you any questions about the tour because I can't imagine there's anything worth saying that you're allowed to say. The tour was really sweet. Yep, I believe it. I've been there. Yep. So then there were some interviews called The Gauntlets. 3 hour? Were they really an hour long each? 3 hours of interviews? I mean, we had 5 or 10 minutes in between, but it was a lot of interviewing. That's intense. Any questions you're willing to talk about? Any anecdotes? Yeah. So, in one of the interview rooms, we got to talking about Commander, I think, and I mentioned something about Sol Ring and how it was really frustrating that Sol Ring was an auto-include in all Commander decks, and it should probably be on the banned list. And they asked me 2 follow-ups, which were very interesting. The first follow-up was, can you design a Commander for us where you wouldn't put Sol Ring in your deck? And I tried a few things. I sort of thought aloud through a few designs. Right. And I was like, I mean, yeah, that would certainly cause you to build a deck that you wouldn't put Sol Ring in, but I don't think that's a fun or interesting constraint, right? Right. There are sort of obvious bad ways to do it. And I've been thinking about it a little bit more since then, and I still don't have a good way. So this is my challenge to you, chat. If you can design a commander where you would not want to put Sol Ring in your deck, and that you think this is a fun commander to play, let us know.
Cards that have odd mana costs, something, something, something bad.
Yeah. And the other question they asked me as a follow-up to that was, okay, so you think Sol Ring should be banned in Commander? What can you argue the opposite position? Say you're trying to convince somebody that Sol Ring should not be banned in Commander, and I had to do that, which I did, and I thought that was a very good question, because it meant that, you know, they're looking for people who are good at seeing opposite points of view, which of course I value a lot in a collaborative environment, you know, and as people should.
Yeah. I mean, the whole design test that we're getting up to was half collaborative, like getting 3 people in a room and talking about their designs. So you went from the interviews to Dominaria Sealed, right? Is that what that is? Dominaria Sealed?
Yep.
Cool. Did you have any ability to play Magic at that point? I mean,
yeah, I mean, I can kind of play Magic in my sleep. I'm not going to say I played Magic well, but I opened some busted rares, so I didn't need to so much. And Graham Hopkins of GDS1 helped me build my sealed pool, so shout out to Graham.
Cool. Yep. Then you moved on to your design challenge, which was to replace Seance at the last minute. So it had to use the same art, fit in the same slot alphabetically, be the same rarity, and not be broken in a way that development would be concerned about. And you had an hour to design 3 cards, which is totally reasonable to design 3 cards in an hour, but not with that set of restrictions. Trust me, as somebody who designed cards for a living at one point, 3 cards is easy. If you have one restriction, 3 cards is easy, but you had like 5. So I did not enjoy this part of the design test, but it was definitely interesting. There you are sitting in a room all by yourself. What's going through your mind there? You're just kind of,
I'm going to say,
kind of creepy
not
taking pictures.
Very much. Yeah, I mean, it was awkward because, like, I knew they were there taking pictures, so it's a little distracting. But I'm not going to be like, "Hey, Mark, stop taking pictures. I'm trying to focus." So at that point, I hadn't slept a lot the night before because there was too much adrenaline, and I hadn't slept a lot the night before that because I had to wake up at 4 a.m. to get on my flight, and I'd just been in 3 hours of interviews.
Oh my god!
Plus, so I was completely fried at that point, and like, just ideas were not coming as quickly as I wanted them to. And it's hard because, like, Seance's art is quite restrictive.
So you came up with 3 cards. Each contestant made 3 cards, and if I remember correctly, you ended up in a meeting, and each one of you had 1 card that kind of stood out as an option that was reasonable. So here we have your card, Saving Grace, here with the minor tweak that they suggested. Is there anything you want to talk about from the design meeting? How did it feel? Was there anything that surprised you?
No, I mean, I really enjoyed that part. Like, it felt like other meetings I've been in where you're productively discussing options to come to a conclusion. And I felt good about how I saw people interacting and reacting to each other's opinions. It seemed not just respectful, but like that people really listened well and were like, okay, I see why you said that, and therefore blah blah blah. Like they were building off of each other's thoughts in a really nice way. And I was trying to do the same, but I was kind of out of steam by that point, so I'm not sure how useful my contributions were. As I mentioned on Goblin Artisans, I thought Jeremy did a little better than either Chris or me in that situation. And actually, Mark wrote about this in his article that Jeremy was the winner of that challenge. But yeah, it was. I've been in other situations like that before, like when you're writing a puzzle hunt or when you're writing a LARP or something, and you just have to sit down and like make a decision on something with other creative people, and it takes a while to get good at that skill of listening and bouncing off of other ideas. And I was just really impressed by how well everyone did at that.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a
It was
skill.
fun.
It's a skill that R&D practices a lot, obviously. So
Yeah.
maybe some of it rubbed off.
Yeah.
So then you did that, and then you. I don't have a picture of you winning because there wasn't a really good picture of that, but you won. So how did it feel? Like, does it feel real yet? I mean,
it feels real now because, like, I've been like emailing employers and telling them, hey, I'm not going to be back next year, and like, looking at apartments and renting, and like actually. So yeah, now it feels real. At the time, I don't know. I'm smiling in that, but you can see the eyes are a little bit glazed. Like,
I believe it. Yeah,
It was a very sort of emotionally intense experience, and I got to be honest, I was pretty overwhelmed.
I believe it. Was there any, like, there wasn't a party afterwards, but I believe you went out to dinner afterwards. Is that the case?
No. So right after that, I went and recorded the interview with Mark.
Okay.
And then they had dinner. Dinner was pizza brought into R&D,
okay.
And then we did a draft of a set that I'm not allowed to talk about.
Right. Oh, that sounds way more relaxing than what they did for us.
I saw it, like you had a DJ and stuff.
They threw a party, like a party with music and a dance floor in a dark party place like you would normally do with drinks and everything. And like,
wow.
So we got to go back to the hotel for a couple hours before that and kind of like, rest a little bit. And then I went to the party and I was like, talk about eyes glazed over. Like, I don't think I talked to anybody more than I absolutely had to. There's an interview of me on YouTube somewhere that they took during that party, and that's literally all the talking I did during that entire party.
Yeah.
I had no brain power left. And I'm not, I'm not an extrovert naturally or anything like that. And here's a room full of like all of the people that I've been, fans of all my life, like from the Mark Rosewater to the Brian David Marshalls to the, pro players to whatever. And it's like, I feel like I'm the tiny little fish in the pond, even though I just won the thing. So I'm like, I'm going to go home now.
No, I think what they did for us was really nice because we got to see this set that, other people have not seen. And we got to chat a little bit with people about the set, give them our feedback on it, which they were interested in hearing since they don't often get new eyes. It was good. And I think we all had a good time with that. I hope Chris and Jeremy, for them, I think it was hopefully a nice thing for them to get to do right after sort of the disappointment of the announcement.
Right. Yeah. It was a pretty nice sort of booby prize is not the right word, but a nice consolation. Like, you get to do this thing that nobody else gets to do. So that's kind of cool. So who signed the foil sheet? I can't see from here, but I see some signatures.
I think it's a lot of people, but I haven't. It just came in the mail today, and I haven't opened it up yet. I'm gonna, I'll have to get it framed and stuff.
No, of course.
But I can tell you this: Eli Schifrin signed it in Phyrexian.
Of course he did.
Of course he did.
It looks pretty awesome. I'm sure that's a souvenir that you will cherish for the rest of your life.
Yeah,
I know how that works.
Pretty sweet.
Cool.
Did you get anything like that when you won?
Not really, no. We got some promo cards, but they were promo cards everybody was getting, like the winter promo cards. There really wasn't anything at all. They did some really good swag for you guys this time, which was pretty cool.
Yeah, they did. You can see the hoodie I'm wearing.
Yeah. I'm jealous. I got a shirt. That's all I got.
Oh, let me show you what else I got, actually.
You get a deck box? I saw these deck boxes they were making.
There's this lovely deck box.
Oh my god, I am so jealous.
Yeah, it's just beautiful, and like leather strap and wood.
That's amazing.
And this T-shirt, which I'm wearing right now.
I've got one of those. So. That's the only piece I got. That's cool. That's really awesome.
Yeah.
So I have another question from chat. Mark Confident asks if you have any advice for GDS4 candidates.
Oh, I've actually been thinking about this a fair bit, and I was planning to maybe write a Goblin Artisans article about it, but maybe I'll just say it right now. What I would say is sort of the same advice for someone who wants to get good at any at any creative or artistic or craft sort of pursuit, which is what makes you good is not practice, but the right kind of practice.
Mm-hmm.
And that good practice, first of all, it needs to be mindful. Like, it can't just be like something that you don't focus on very much or don't think about very much. You have to actually engage your full attention in the task. It has to be at an appropriate difficulty level for your current set of skills. So if you're like just learning about magic design, you should just learn how to design good commons. And if you feel like you've been doing this for a while, you should like be trying to make up keywords for a set, or like trying to think about how would I design a whole color's worth of commons in a particular setting. And most importantly, you need feedback on your work from people who are qualified to give that feedback. So you need to find, for music, that what that means for me is I have a voice teacher who tells me how to sing good. And for magic design, that means you have to find a community of people who are going to give you useful feedback on your designs, people who really know what they're talking about and are willing to be straight with you when what you're doing is not effective.
Right. That's what I would say. You might just have a community that you can recommend for that.
Yeah, I can think of one. Obviously, I think you should all read Goblin Artisans, read the stuff that people write there, argue with people in the comments. You don't have to agree with everyone there. I've been arguing with Jay Treat for the last 7 years, and I think it has helped both of us grow quite a lot. Also, we've started to formalize our article submission guidelines at Goblin Artisans. It used to be like you became a writer for us either by like, we would randomly be like, man, we're low on writers. Let's ask Jules Robbins if he'll come write for us because he's awesome. Right. Now we have like an article submission thing where you can propose something and then we'll give you feedback on it and say if it's something that we would like to see more of, etc. Mm-hmm. If you want to become a blog author for Goblin Artisans, then keep writing guest articles for us, and eventually you will probably become a blog author.
Yep. Cool. Yeah, I don't know if I have much to add to what you've been saying. I mean, I don't really know how I would go about practicing getting better at magic, because I'm kind of in a weird position where I got to do it for reals for so long that it's not really practice at that point. I learned to do magic trial by fire, basically. I don't know if I've ever actually admitted this anywhere, but I did not actually ever publicly design a magic card in any way until GDS 1. I started from zero, whereas GDS 2 and GDS 3 were full of people who did basically what you're talking about. You guys got together, you created Goblin Artisans. There's other communities elsewhere, but that's pretty much the way it's done, it seems, these days. I mean, how many of the top 8 were Goblin Artisans?
3 of us, Jay Treat and Ryan Siegel-Stechler and I. Jay's one of the blog authors and founders. And I feel like I have to say, Jay is the one who kept Goblin Artisans going over the years at times when sometimes the rest of us were like too busy to do anything. Right. Jay was always creating content. Right. So he kept the community alive very much.
Well, 3 out of 8's a crazy percentage for like one group of people to produce. Like that's... And you won, so that's pretty awesome too.
I think Goblin Artisans has a certain advantage that other magic custom magic communities don't, which is, I think there's a culture of constructive and kind feedback that, like, we're all in this together trying to help each other improve. We don't really put up with people being dicks to each other at all. Right. We're actually pretty quick to moderate if anything like that happens, which it very rarely has. But the other thing is that I think there's also just a culture of like, we're here to improve on and follow the guidelines that Wizards itself uses. Right. You're not there for memes. You're not there for... A lot of what I find in like the custom magic group on Reddit is people just posting joke cards and meme cards, or cards that are just the first random card someone ever made, and they just want to design a couple cards, and that's really all they care about. And so like you got that all mixed in with people who are doing real serious stuff, and it kind of rounds out
a lot of noise.
Yeah,
And you guys take it seriously, so
I'd say we do take it seriously, and to some extent, I think the fact that we're a blog rather than like a forum where absolutely anyone can post helps us maintain that standard. Which is not to say that our commenters are not a completely awesome crew, but we there's some control over the content, that like anything that gets discussed there is by someone who's taking it pretty seriously and has some experience.
Yeah, I would say that's probably kind of in a nutshell what your feedback boils down to, is take it seriously. You can't just fly by the seat of your pants and design good Magic cards if you've never done it before.
Yeah. And in fact, I would say the biggest mistake I made over the last 7 years was that I did not design enough cards. So when I started Goblin Artisans, like, it wasn't really that, all right, I didn't get to top 8 in GDS2. I'm going to establish this training ground so I can win GDS3. Though, I mean, that was part of it. But like, it was also that, like, well, I know that there are other ways besides a great designer search into R&D. If I write enough about Magic design, then I will get noticed, right?
It's helpful, yeah.
I mean, this was what I was thinking. I'm not sure to what extent it's accurate. But because of that, I wasn't designing a bunch of cards because I was like, if I design a bunch of my own custom cards and sets, they can't read any of that. How is that going to help me get hired?
Right. Well, they probably don't read anything on Goblin Artisans for that reason, even if it's not technically containing cards.
Yeah, so we have a tag specifically for that. We have a WotC safe tag, so that like, and we try to tweet articles and be like, "Hey, I wrote this article, contains no custom designs." Like, try to
right.
But I don't know how much they actually saw. But it turned out to be useful anyway, because then when I wrote my essays, I could be like, hey, I'm going to refer back specifically to this article series I wrote about Magic design on my blog that you can totally read.
Right. Cool. So yeah, that's the end of the story, I think. You're going to be another great designer in the history of awesome great designers. Is there
That's
anything?
The plan.
Yeah, no, I'm looking. I can't wait to see what you do. I'm looking forward to seeing your first card. I know the first one's always special, even if it turns out to not be anything important.
Yeah. So I'm still curious if any of my designs from GDS2, one of them at least did get printed, but I don't know that it came from me.
It could also very well just be the same thing that you did with the Revered, where it popped into somebody's head and then went into their subconscious and then it got designed again.
Yeah, that's absolutely possible.
Totally realistic.
So, I think it was Deathwind from Avacyn Restored. I'll have to ask around once I get there and be like, hey, did I make this card? See if anyone remembers.
Cool. We have a random question right at the end. What do you feel was your strongest submission?
The strongest week was probably the art week, I think, which is funny because I hadn't been that confident in it. Like, I didn't know that I was going to get first. Like, I thought I was going to do pretty well, but like, I wasn't super sure because it turned out they really liked some cards that I'd just been like, oh, well, this is a perfunctory design, but I can't think of anything better. I had that red card that was Radiate from a Graveyard, that red sorcery, and Mark Rosewater was like, this is amazing, it's so cool, and I was like, okay, I mean, I feel like it's really low-hanging fruit, but if you like it, great. But, you know, that's a lesson for me too, is that like, just because fruit is low-hanging doesn't mean you shouldn't take it. Right.
You also have to ask yourself, like, why hasn't this card been printed yet? Maybe nobody's quite come up with it yet.
Yeah, and well, so that was something that screwed me up on the Circus Challenge, right? Because like, I thought my acrobatics card was like, oh, this is so cool and elegant, and I know there's a reason they haven't printed this yet, but I feel like this actually does work, and the playtesters like it. And then they were like, yeah, we've tried this. There's no way it can work the way you want it to work. Sorry. So.
I mean, at the same time, though, it's better to take a risk and get told that we've thought of this card and we just can't print it than to be told, like, this is a boring design and you're not showing us anything.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
What are your 10 favorite modern legal Magic cards? And I hope they all have stories.
Well, I'm not gonna give you 10, but let me give you one, which is Endrick Sar Master Breeder, which is a wacky time spiral card that tells the story of a character who only appeared in flavor text in Fallen Empires. And I love it because, sort of like my clown car, it has this gameplay that reflects the narrative of the card, which is that he makes thralls, and then the thralls rise up and overthrow and consume him. And I love cards that tell stories like that.
Thanks for showing up, everybody. Thanks for being an awesome audience. We couldn't do it without you. And thanks, Ari, for showing up. Thanks for listening to my
Alexis, for having me.
my crazy questions. And I can't wait to see what you do. Can't wait to see your good work.
I'm very excited to get started.
Cool.
Good night, all.
Good night, everybody.